Motorola is one of the most important companies in history. They're literally responsible for the mobile phone among many other inventions. But their success didn't last forever. They took hit after hit. They were left with no profits, bled dry from the inside out by Google, and left with none of their technology. Yet, this wasn't the end. Motorola was down, but not out. Somehow, after all of this, they did the impossible. Motorola not only survived, but began to thrive. This is the story of how. At their core, Motorola was a wireless communications company, but that's massively underselling their long, prestigious history. In the Second World War, they made a breakthrough invention, the first portable two-way radio, the SCR-300, which soon became known as the walkie-talkie. It was a pivotal tool for the US Army Corps and had a range between 10 and 20 miles, but that's just the beginning. Motorola also created unified S-band radio, a crucial piece of equipment for the Apollo 11 moon landing mission. The radio was responsible for one of the most important video transmissions in human history.
Very, very fine grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder. Ground mass is very fine. I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man.
Motorola has had a long history beyond these two examples. It's actually unbelievable how big an impact this one company has had on humanity. Yet, shockingly, these pivotal examples aren't even what they're known for today. In 1973, Motorola engineer Martin Cooper had just finished his latest prototype. It allowed for remote calling anywhere, but it was fully handheld and didn't have cables, and didn't have to be attached to a vehicle, and it wasn't a radio. Motorola had just invented the mobile phone, but this was just the prototype. It would take Motorola another full decade to bring it to the masses and over $100 million. But the wait was worth it. In 1983, they released the first commercial mobile phone to the world, the Dyna-TAC 8000X. It was bulky, needed 10 hours to charge, and only allowed for 30 minutes of talk time. But it was the first of its kind. It also cost $3,995 or $11,800 today. But despite all this, people were lining up to get this invention. The wait lists were in the thousands. Motorola had made a huge success, but Motorola kept working. Motorola created and dominated the mobile phone market. In the 90s, about a decade after the Dyna-TAC, they still had a 45% market share, and their phones continued to get smaller and better. Moving into the early 2000s, they had a fierce rivalry with Nokia and soon unveiled the Razr 3, a sleek, ultra-thin flip phone and one of the most iconic and successful phones in history. The Razr 3 sold over 130 million units. Their invention altered the entire world of technology. Almost everyone living today is directly impacted by this monumental invention, which is what makes what happened next so surprising.
Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
It seemed like overnight, the world of mobile phones was changed forever. The industry had been gradually moving towards smartphones for a little bit, but after the reveal of the iPhone with its sleek design, App Store, and full touchscreen, there was no going back. So how did Motorola react? Surprisingly, Motorola was already most of the way there. Their phones, like the Razr for the time, were pretty advanced. Most competitors had a bulky appearance, but Motorola's flagship phone was compact and sleek. They also released the Motorola Q in 2006, which was pretty close to a smartphone in terms of useful functionality, yet they were lacking something crucial. Two key elements helped the iPhone succeed: the App Store and the touchscreen. Motorola phones had no flash interface like Apple, and very little third-party apps. Plus, just by looking at the Motorola Q, you could see why it didn't catch on. Worst of all, it was running Windows as its operating system. The traditional dumb phone had been most of Motorola's business, but these were falling out of favor. Time was running out and they needed to adapt fast. Competitors quickly jumped on Google's Android as an operating system, but Motorola was hesitant. It took them until late 2009 to finally release their first smartphone, the Droid. It gained some popularity and helped Motorola survive, but even then, it wasn't really what consumers wanted. It had a touchscreen, but in reality, it was a slide phone with a full keyboard. It used Android as the name implies, but it wasn't quite right. It looked closer to a mini laptop than a smartphone. In truth, the Droid only delayed the inevitable. In 2006, Motorola's market share was 22%, but by 2009, that had fallen all the way to 6%. Keep in mind, at their peak, they controlled about half of the industry. Their profits were also falling and things were about to go from bad to worse. In fact, it got so bad that in 2011, the company split in two: Motorola Solutions, the arm focused on wired telecommunications, and Motorola Mobility, the arm focused on mobile phones. It was unfortunate but necessary. Motorola Mobility could have brought both sides down with them, so they went their separate ways. We'll refer to Motorola Mobility as just Motorola from here. Yet, this split wasn't even the worst thing to happen to Motorola. Their true fall was coming, and it was disguised as salvation. In 2012, Motorola, at one of their lowest points yet, was acquired by Google. The tech giant paid $12.5 billion for Motorola, their biggest acquisition to date. They appointed a new CEO, Dennis Woodside, who laid out his plan. Our aim is simple: to focus Motorola Mobility's remarkable talent on fewer, bigger bets and create wonderful devices that are used by people around the world. But Motorola at this stage was already falling well behind, so why would Google want a dying phone company? Under Google's ownership, Motorola introduced their new smartphones, the Moto X and Moto G. These were a huge leap forward and much closer to the competition. The Moto X was their top-of-the-line innovative offering. It had advanced voice recognition and a great accessible UI, but it was pricey at $620, which made it difficult to compete against the well-established competition. Conversely, the Moto G was aimed at lower price points, but despite this, it still had a great quad-core processor and used the Android OS. And at $180, it was a huge hit. Price-sensitive customers loved it, and it found a fantastic niche amongst the now saturated smartphone market. Yet, even with this success, it didn't matter. You see, Google's appointed CEO wasn't entirely honest. Google didn't really care about Motorola's phones. They were after something completely different. Over the 2 years after their acquisition, Google began bleeding Motorola dry. Not their cash, but their patents. Motorola had thousands and thousands of patents from their long history, which is exactly what Google was interested in. They quickly transferred ownership of most of their patents, taking 15,000 of Motorola's 17,000. Then they tossed them aside. In January 2014, Google announced the sale of Motorola to Lenovo for a fraction of what they bought them for, less than a quarter of what they were worth just 2 years before. To make matters worse, Woodside, Google's appointed CEO, saw this opportunity to jump ship to Dropbox. By this point, Motorola had next to nothing. It seemed like this was the end for the company. Motorola had invented the mobile industry itself and dominated it. Yet after the introduction of smartphones, they lost time and time again and soon fell behind the bigger players. Now, they had lost most of their patents they had used for most of the last century. This should have been the end for Motorola, but somehow it wasn't. They were down, but not out. If they wanted to survive even as a subsidiary, they needed to pivot. They needed a new niche that they could dominate, but what? Well, luckily there was one man ready to revive Motorola and set them on a new path: Sergio Buniac. Buniac, now the president of the company, wasn't someone appointed by Lenovo or Google. He was a 20-year veteran of Motorola and had seen it all: their dominance, their fall, their acquisition. He was ready to put an end to their losing streak. So what did he do? Motorola had some experience with smartphones, but their competitors had better technology, flashier phones, and far better branding. Their top-of-the-line model, the Moto X, simply could not stand its own against Samsung and the iPhone. But all of these competitors had one weakness: price. This gave them a unique angle with their price-friendly model, the Moto G. Thanks to their history and function-based phones, they were excellent at making reliable, affordable products, and this was the core of Buniac's new strategy. Their main competitors were dominating first-world markets, but they were too expensive for emerging markets. Buniac pivoted Motorola towards India and Latin America. These markets were massive and growing, but the individual buying power of customers was still low. So Motorola would offer affordable, quality smartphones to these areas with good software. They could offer much better value here than the big brands and had the potential to dominate. Also, Buniac knew these markets very well personally, as he had spent years living in Mexico on the ground as the sales director. The question is, did it pay off? Motorola began releasing phones in India, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, a new generation of the successful Moto G. But that's not all, as they also released the Moto E, which was an even more affordable version of the Moto G. Despite their low prices, they still had fantastic technology, making them great value for money. They also came with the standard Android experience. It wasn't long before the strategy began to pay dividends, and soon Motorola became one of the most popular brands in these markets. They soon had over 20% market share in Latin America, with the Moto G surpassing 200 million total units sold. Yet, during all of this, something unbelievable happened. Their phones offered such good value that they started surging in popularity in the United States itself. Not enough to overtake Apple or Samsung, but enough to become the third largest smartphone brand, holding an impressive 10% market share. Motorola was back. Buniac and the team had done the impossible. They had emerged from ruin and found themselves back on top. Would you like to make videos like this? Admittedly, it's quite a bit of work, but one tool that's made the entire process much easier is Invideo AI. Invideo AI was already the leading AI video creation platform with over 25 million users worldwide, but their new update V3 is finally out and has completely changed the game. It enables you to express and communicate your ideas in the form of stunning videos, the kind you've always wanted to create, the kind you'd be excited to share with your peers, in the most seamless, intuitive way possible, irrespective of whatever skill level you're at. You simply start by typing in a prompt for the video you'd like to create, for example, a strawberry-flavored Coke ad. The more descriptive your prompt, the better, though I'd recommend sticking to 30-second to 1-minute segments so that it renders fast and you don't blow through all your credits. And that's it. From here, you can easily fine-tune your video by just using text commands like add my voice. Unlike traditional video tools with steep learning curves that only solve for parts of your video creation process, Invideo is the creative partner that you have always wanted, that removes all friction and makes the process so intuitive and fluid that it disappears, letting users focus entirely on the vision of their idea. You can try Invideo AI for free, but if you want to use their generative capabilities, I highly recommend that you go for the generative plan that starts at $96 per month. It is the one that I have and gives you the most bang for the buck with 15 generative minutes. If you're already an Invideo user, you can simply go to the add-on section and buy generative seconds. Thank you to Invideo for sponsoring this video. Everyone who knew about Motorola's fall expected the company to die. They were just another sad story of a historic company falling behind. But they didn't die. After receiving blow after blow, losing market share, their patents, and technologies, they still came back. It shows that what matters most of all is strategy and leadership. If you hit the right niche and offer the right value, you can succeed, even against giants. Motorola Mobile is now thriving, and simultaneously, their sibling company, Motorola Solutions, is also doing well as a completely different company. Motorola looks extremely different than they did 20 years ago, but internally, their resolve and grit are stronger than ever. But that's exactly what you would expect from a company with a 100-year history. Motorola isn't the only mobile brand that went through hardship. Their early rival, Nokia, faced similar challenges but went in a totally different direction. Did you know they actually mocked the iPhone and thought that it would be a failure? Their story is just as shocking, and somehow they also avoided bankruptcy and survived. Click here to learn how Nokia went from success to failure to revival. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.